Hello everybody, my name is Eric, and today we're going to be doing one of the most requested videos on the channel. Is Riot Vanguard Spyware? Now, I don't have a super negative prior with Vanguard. I genuinely, I can see benefits to having this kind of a service, but what we're going to do is attempt to figure out to what degree is there any level of spying going on. Now, how do you determine that? Now, that's the tricky thing. For most things, the answer is obvious. Either I use MITM proxy or I decompile it. With Vanguard, we can do neither, because there is no way I am getting this running in a VM. It is theoretically possible, but that's a nightmare. So no MITM proxy. And the other option of decompiling it, well, it's VM protected, and unpacking VM protect when on a kernel driver that you can't debug without writing a Windows kernel interface emulator, that seems a bit out of question as well. So how are we going to try and figure out what it's doing? Well, I'm going to use the simple logic that any spying we should be concerned about is going to be done over the internet, and we can use a tool called HTTP Debugger, which to my understanding works similar to how Frida works. Now, of course, I'm going to use an alt account for this, because any reverse engineering of Vanguard is probably not going to be something the anti-cheat's going to love. So from boot till now, we can see that Vanguard does not make any HTTP requests, just as the Riot developers claimed, that while the driver, which is checking what is loading, is always on, the actual anti-cheat is not. Now we get a telemetry request to pvp.net. Oh no, we want to look at the response details. Service API name, Riot Games, info, API, game SDK. So this is just, as far as we can tell, this is just Riot telemetry. Now this Vanguard one, or Valorant could be, okay, no, it's actually just downloading something. There's also some sort of service running on localhost. You can see this. This all looks fairly normal and related to the League of Legends client. Trying to figure out where this crashed. So now that we've opened the Riot client, we can see some interaction going on with this internal server. Player preferences. Now this is not any anti-cheat hooks yet, but now is about remix. This is, oh, that's Discord in the background. Now what happens if we actually try to go to play the game? Not too much so far. So let's try actually, okay. Now there's some data being exchanged with this local hosted server, but nothing super spicy going on so far. Check the other side of this. So we can simply play any of the free rotation champions. We'll play Tristana, and we see more, but still not much in the way of Vanguard requests. These are just the requests related to, I'm assuming this is somehow saying that I've selected Vanguard, and this is some sort of representation of what looks like a JavaScript web token. Now the game is open. Now we got a Vanguard hit. So there we go. So we pretty much, unless they are going to extreme lengths that nobody has found. So the actual name of this is vgc.exe. Let's see if we can find this one. So if we look under DLLs on Process Explorer, we can find this vgc.dll, which is the Vanguard user mode service, which is then going to hook into the Vanguard kernel mode service. Now we can, so that is now running. Now, so the driver runs, but not much happens. So here are some other things. Now, unfortunately, this is encrypted, so we can't read exactly what it is saying. But we at least now have a way of confirming when these requests are happening and where they go. So pretty much everything goes to this vg.ac.pvp.net domain. You can also learn some things from the size of these different things. So when we start the game, we send this. And we get a big response. Okay, and now here's another big response. Now, since then, we've had this one additional request. And, okay. Now, what I'm curious about, because to my understanding, since the Vanguard update, what used to happen if you were to open, let's say, x64 debug in-game, is it would just crash, like Roblox does. No crash now. That's actually one of the nice things about the Vanguard update. But, right the second I open x64 debug, we do get a trace. And I'm going to guess there's something in here saying he just opened x64 debug. Now, this we know is not going to work, but did we just... Oh. Oh. Exit code VGC, service stop. Oh. Okay. So, of course, as you'd expect. Now, let's see if we can play another game without rebooting, or if the Vanguard integrity is totally dead until we reboot the computer. Okay, Van 129. So that's one of the, I guess you would say, cases where it's actually in a way gotten less strenuous, in that now that Vanguard is there, the client doesn't just panic when you open x64 debug, and you can x64 debug other applications. But if we do try to debug the game, bad things happen. And let's see if we go down to the Vanguard tray. Yeah, and the Vanguard exe has died. So no, we actually cannot. We won't be able to play anymore without rebooting. But that kind of makes sense. So it seems like basically all of the checks were while I was tabbed out of the game. While I was in the game, we sent very few. Now, given that these are marked as proto-buffs, we can potentially try a site called Protobuff Decoder that might be able to get some useful information out of this. So what we get from that is a byte array, and if we attempt to, we can convert that into a byte array from the Vanguard communication, and this looks like some form of encryption, given it doesn't, it could be some other non-ASCII, but it's not going to be something easily reversible. Now we can try it, we can try the response as well to see what might be in that. And this was the termination message when we tried to x64 debug Vanguard. Now we can tell this is a much smaller response than the other ones. This is a tiny packet. This was the packet when we opened x64 debug, which we were allowed to do without trouble, but then we do that. Now the other Vanguard related concern that's quite common that is worth addressing is this. The Vanguard is taking screenshots of your PC. Now this is on the unknown cheats form, which is obviously a cheating form. I actually kind of like reading this form, not because, say, I don't cheat in multiplayer games, but there's a lot of interesting reverse engineering stuff on this site, and there's a lot of people here who really know what they're doing. There's also a lot of people who don't know what they're doing. And there's, of course, the incentive that getting rid of a highly effective anti-cheat would be wonderful for cheaters. But let's see what they've found. So Vanguard takes screenshots. It can capture your entire screen, overlays and all, and that means even your Discord chats might get it. It can capture full screen mode. And here's some theory about GDPR. Now, Riot deny that this violates the GDPR, but that's really for lawyers to decide. So there is a Vanguard module which will take a screenshot based on parameters sent by the Vanguard servers. Now, what essentially is happening here, and this is something that I can totally believe because I've heard anecdotally as well from someone who's done a lot of reversing on this, that the answer to the question, is Vanguard spyware, hugely depends on whether you have anything that looks like you're cheating or not. If you have nothing, if you're doing nothing suspicious, the answer is a pretty solid no. But what happens here is, okay, so if you're just in Vanguard, it's just going to look at Valorant, make sure, for example, that nothing has injected onto your screen. That's what the kernel driver is doing here. Otherwise, it'll take a screenshot of the whole screen. And then here's how it's encoded. And it's also worth noting, once Riot were asked about this, this only runs in Valorant, not League of Legends, which seems to be a general direction that they have made, is Vanguard for Valorant, because shooter games have a lot more cheats than MOBAs, Vanguard for Valorant is much stricter, and this module isn't as useful for League of Legends. One person is saying there's a way around this using Kaspersky and going to a banking site because that will block this functionality, but that probably wouldn't be. And here's a more reasonable theory on why this is being used, so that if there's any way that an undetected cheat was injecting on the screen, they could catch it that way. Here is Mirage of Penguins, which is the main developer for this, for Riot, commenting on this screenshot gate, if you want to call it. Someone asked about this functionality, and what he says, which we can reasonably guarantee is probably true, looking at the relative lack of any big data being sent from the client, is not enabled for League of Legends and is only used in Valorant, like many things. If we do ever use it, it would be in the actual client, and the goal would be spotting scripting overlays or zoom hacks. However, we're not certain this would ever be necessary because the fog of war is unforgiving, and your client rarely has information on units that you shouldn't see. So a purely vision-based cheat is mostly useless. That makes sense. Now, whether the alternative use that the people on the cheating forum discovered, maybe it could be useful for detecting some sort of environment. They also talk a bit in a different one of his posts about VMs and GeForce Now and why it's not possible to that work, which I actually genuinely didn't understand, but it kind of makes sense. Absolutely, someone trying to reverse engineer it, I can agree with that. But the problem is that then it could be spoofed. And so this also further reinforces the idea that there is no sneaky networking route through the driver. I mean, I guess if someone really wanted to test that, you could use a hardware device to actually intercept the Ethernet and compare it to the Windows stack. That's how you can detect that kind of a rootkit, but it doesn't seem likely that that's happening. Now, an interesting tidbit from reading some of his Reddit responses is that apparently you can start the Vanguard service manually, and for a while, League of Legends wasn't enforcing the startup check, but that may no longer be true, so I'm going to try it out. Now I have to close HTTP debugger again in order to start the game, because there's some check there, but then we can do it. And the client starts, but nope, we get a van error. So they have fixed that, so now if you want to, so you do have to let it run at startup. So you can't use the method you could before. Okay, so the final thing, I'm just going to pull up a video that I made a while ago. And of course, this doesn't prove anything. But I think one thing that is worth considering, the idea that a kernel driver is going to enable a horde of spying is just fundamentally not all that accurate. Any of the spying that they can do with the kernel driver, with the exception of, the kernel driver can bypass a lot of things, such as cheats trying to hide themselves, or security programs trying to stop hooks. But what a kernel driver cannot, you don't need a kernel driver to, let's say, steal your passwords or record your disk, where ultimately what we discover is that my simple stealer I made to test this that doesn't use administrator is in fact able to exfiltrate Chrome cookies and everything else sensitive on the computer without ever getting administrator access, just by using crypt to unprotect data. So it doesn't mean that it's great to apply a kernel driver. As CrowdStrike shows, there can definitely be consequences, but I think the core logic of this being a Chinese spyware campaign is a bit silly. So fundamentally, this is going to end up being pretty subjective. So what we know is Vanguard does not send network requests when you're not playing Riot games. Vanguard takes screenshots of Valorant. Vanguard could take screenshots of League of Legends. Riot say that they're complying with global privacy laws and that there is no special EU version of Vanguard, therefore that everyone is compliant with GDPR, which has some pretty stringent requirements. And the final thing I will just say is, and as how this was discovered, is while, of course, the driver is the opposite of open source, it is entirely proprietary, anti-cheat drivers do have a very, very strong incentive to be reverse engineered, because anyone selling cheats has to do it. So, as a result, it is very likely that if anything truly terrible was in Vanguard, these people would have found it. Like here, we can see how they discovered how the HVCI check works, and someone's figured that out. And then there's hordes of these different spoofers, and this is... I just genuinely, I don't believe it is possible that anything could be snuck in there for a long time that nobody has noticed, that none of these people who are very incentivized to make people afraid of anti-cheats wouldn't have found. So that's my take. I want to hear what you have to say in the comments below. I think this will be a bit controversial because there are a lot of people who have a different opinion about it. I understand the concerns about kernel-level anti-cheat, But I also think, in the context of a game that only runs on a proprietary operating system, I don't find it to be an overwhelming concern. That's all for me for now. Bye.